Okay. Welcome to the class, guys. Just making sure we missing anybody. I think that Royce is out of town, and it's good to see everybody's smiling face. Somebody brought sweets. I don't know who the sweets are from. That's good. That's good. We're in Parashat Toldot, T-O-L-D-O-T, as it's spelled in English. Parashat, Genesis, the 20. Yes, you may. Genesis, the. Hold on. There we go. 25:19 is where it starts. 25:19. Now, for you're visiting for the first time, this is how the shtick goes. I do a few minutes of a short shiur, lecture, and then after that, we're going to go into the discussion of the text. This is, once again, a very famous text, a lot of very famous stories written within. No way that we can exhaustively cover all the things in this one class. However, Thursday morning at 10 is the opportunity to come through and pull everything apart. And we really do take our time and do that. But for the sake of this class, I'm going to speak just a moment about the concept of being a guardian of the covenant from this Parashat and the Parashat. And then after that, we're going to go into the discussion. So if there are things that come to mind about the class, what you've studied, what you've read in the last couple of days before this class, make sure to jot yourself a note and let's bring it up in a discussion of the class. The purpose of coming to class is not to hear me rattle my bones. Okay? The purpose is for you to pour over the text, look for things that are problems, things that you have questions on, comments or things that you've learned. And it's an opportunity for us also to pitch in and to make what I call a smorgasbord of delicious meals. And so we'll have fun doing it. The guardians of the covenant. In this week's haftorah portion, which is Malachi 1:1 through 2:7, there is a mention of the tremendous love God harbors for the children of Israel. And the retribution he will visit upon the children of Esau. There's a reminder that Esau I've hated, Jacob I've loved, Esau I've hated. And to be honest with you, this kind of text is a bit troubling for a purist who wants to see God as being a God of love. Right? We want to see God as a God of love. And how can he say Esau he hated? And then there's this very troubling concept that if Esau was predetermined from the womb to be Rasha, to be wicked, then why should we treat him so evil? That was the way he was supposed to be doing things. It's something we should consider in a moment because we're going to talk about how to treat those people who seem to be predetermined to have issues in their life. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But with that being said, he said that he would visit upon the children of Esau who had persecuted their cousins. This follows a theme in this week's Parashat reading, these two juxtaposed positions of Yaakov and Esau. One being the good boy, the pleasant boy, and the other one being the hunter, the gatherer, the tough guy. One who loved the covenant and wanted a covenant, and the other one who disregarded it, didn't really mean that much. Now, let's review just shortly what happens and why we have this story set up in the beginning. First, in the story of Yaakov and Esau, when they are born, it says that Rivka had this struggling, Rebecca had this struggling within her womb of the two boys, the twins. And I can tell you today, my daughter had twins, and there was a struggle in the womb. And to this day, Rachel is always in charge of Levi all the time. And she was that way in the womb. She was on top of him, and she would always kick him in the head with his her heel. And now they're out of the womb, she just walks up, takes whatever he has. Doesn't matter what. If he has a sandwich, she takes it. Sometimes she'll take the bread out and give it to the dog. She's in charge. So it's in some way, there are some predispositions and temperaments and personalities that start from the womb. Jacob and Esau. Esau comes out first. He is technically what? Firstborn. And Jacob comes out holding Esau's heel. Kev. He's holding the heel of Esau. And when he comes out, he says that the first 13 years of their life, it's that they grew up, as one great sage says, grew up like a rose bush and a thistle bush together. Until they were 13, you really couldn't tell which was the rose and which was the thistle. They both sort of looked the same. They had their rough edges. They needed to be disciplined. They had to be schooled. But by the time they got to be at the age of early manhood, 13 years old, very clearly you could see the difference between the two. Yaakov loved to spend time in his father's tent, and actually his grandfather's tent, learning Torah. His grandfather, Abraham was still alive when the boys were born. So he spends this time, and where was Esau? By the time he was 13, he was out in the woods. As soon as the bell rang from school, he took off, got off the bus, proverbially, and ran out into the woods. And there he was hunting and trapping, but it said something more. There's sort of a secret in the language of Hebrew. It says that he trapped men with his mouth. What does that mean? What does it mean to trap somebody with their mouth?
A verbal slap?
Say again?
Like a verbal slap?
Well, he knew how to trap people.
Beguiling.
Beguiling. Say again? Manipulation. That's the key right there. Someone told me that they were raised up in a very abusive home. And in this abusive home, it was so abusive that even the children developed the same type of psychological abuse on each other. She, being the oldest child, really wanted to live sort of a righteous life and dress modestly and all those things. And the children would say, when she would babysit them, "You can't tell Dad that we were bad, because if we do, I asked you if you would forgive me, and you did. So if you tell him it's a sin to lie because you didn't forgive me." And it was like her little 7-year-old brother psychologically manipulating her. Right? She remembers growing up that way, but the whole family was like that. And the father even used that as an excuse to do all kinds of abuse. So what am I saying? Entrapment means that Esau had developed a great skill and cunning to make you think what you needed to think. It said that he would ask his Abba, he would ask Isaac, how much to tithe from salt and hay. Now we all know there wasn't a need to bring tithe, salt, and hay. But what did Isaac, what was he trying to entrap Isaac to think? That he was a deep, contemplative thinker of the Torah law. In reality, he wasn't really interested. He just had a cunning way of drawing you in. And in some way, I think he was trying to do that with his brother, Yaakov. When he came up to him and he says, "What's that red stuff?" I think he's getting ready to pull the big one. He thinks, in his mind, he's getting ready to pull the great con game. I'm going to get some food because I'm dying. Now, mind you, this red lentil soup was the soup prepared in the process of what? Mourning whom? Abraham. So Abraham had died. So here's the time of mourning. This would be like tantamount to going to your father's funeral, or your grandfather's funeral. And you're only interested in going to the funeral because they're going to serve food after at the end. And that's all you're talking about. Oh man, they're going to have great, they're going to have all this great food. And they have roast. I can't wait till Aunt Mabel comes because she'll have so-and-so there. People be thinking, this guy's a little off. But no, see, he figured, I'm hungry. All he cared about was his temporal needs. Right? It wasn't that he didn't love his father. I really do believe he loved his father. I believe he had a love for his brother. But he also loved himself more than anything. He did not have what we call the stewardship of the covenant deep down in his heart, in his soul. And that's the reason why God hated Esau. When we say hated, we cannot think of it in terms of humans. When we think of human hate, what do we think? Unjust, vengeance, anger, wrath. No. So we put this term of God hated Esau. What he hated is the fact that he had no regard for the covenant that he had given his grandfather. None. Didn't care. Wasn't material to him. This was a lack of stewardship, and this is the reason why that God so abhorred Esau. You see, when Yaakov decided to do what he did, he was convinced by his mother to go in and do what? To take and put wool on his arms to make him feel hairy like his brother, and to go into his blind father and convince him he's Esau. Now, one way or another, I don't know about you, but I read the text, and it's a little disturbing, because I'm thinking as a son to my father, it sends chills down my spine to think that I would go in and take advantage of my father who would be blind to get the covenant of being the firstborn son of the family. Just seems very odd and uncomfortable. So, I'm going to say this, and this is how I come to comfort with it. When it comes to the guardianship of the covenant, it ain't personal. It's not about you. It's about the covenant. Yaakov didn't hate Esau. It wasn't personal. He wasn't trying to cheat Esau. What he was trying to do was protect the covenant. He wasn't there to gain more finances than Esau. It was about protecting the covenant. He wasn't there to pull off a con game on his dear blinded old father. It was about covering and taking care of the covenant. Whatever it took to take care of the covenant, that's what must be done. And that's why he did it. As a matter of fact, if we go back, let's go back to Abraham. God, in his infinite wisdom and knowledge, saved this whole idea of the covenant of what? The land and the covenant of progeny, generations. Two things. God wanted to give a land to a people, and that land to the people was about preserving Torah. The preservation of Torah was about bringing light and civilization to the world. Who does he choose but the son of an idolater? Of all people, why an idolater's son, for crying out loud? And then when Abraham comes along, he brings his nephew Lot with him. And Lot is there with him. And Abraham says, make your choice. You take the north or the south. I'll take whatever. And obviously Lot chose his Lot. And then Lot comes along, and the angel takes him out of Sodom and Gomorrah. And lo and behold, they think the world is coming to an end. And there's an incestuous relationship with his daughter. And they bore a child. And you would think, oh my goodness, could you not have put that in there? Could you have just said something else? Not placing this whole thing about a father and a daughter. Oh, creepy. Twice. Yes, twice. This is really ridiculous. Why are we doing this? I mean, just think about this. Talking about it in mixed companies make people a little creepy, and especially in a postmodern society. But yet, it's nothing personal. It's about a covenant. Follow my logic. It was about the fact that God had a purpose and a plan, and he takes the imperfections of every man, woman, and child, and all of it works for one purpose: to bring about the restoration of mankind to the Garden of Eden. This is what this is about. From the time Adam and Eve committed the sin in the Garden of Eden of eating of this tree of the knowledge of good and evil, it was about restoring the world and creation back into its previous state. So whatever it took, it was going to happen. And it was going to happen in spite of the people in the scenes. Esau would have been a great answer to this whole thing, but yet there was a struggle. As a matter of fact, Abraham had the same struggle between Ishmael and his son, Isaac. So it's always been about making sure that one thing is up front. Who has the ball? Who has the ball? When a football player that would take personal the fact that he doesn't get the ball would seem silly. Why? Because all the teammates would go, no, this is about getting the ball down to the goal, not about you grabbing the ball and running somewhere. The whole point is we have the ball, and that is the covenant. With that being said, so we understand that there is a level in which even the imperfections that are brought about in the Scripture are a lesson for us all. Don't you think? Are they there for us to sit back at armchair quarterback and talk about how horrible Lot was to have a relationship with his daughter, or how horrible that Abraham would even go to the place of trying to sacrifice his son? Oh my goodness, it's terrible. And then how horrible would it be that Yaakov would go and steal the covenant from his brother? Terrible. But what's important is who has the ball and who's going to keep the ball running. That has been the deal from the very beginning. God says, I have chosen you because you have kept all my commandments. That's huge. And then he said, not only that, but the reason why I've chosen you is because your children and your progeny will keep all the commandments. Well, my goodness, we're on a bad start already, right? Because we have one that the covenant had to be taken from so that the covenant would continue. But what does that say? Is that Yaakov had understood the mission and the purpose and understood the spirit of his father and his grandfather.
That was intended for his older brother.
And it was intended for his older brother. Nothing personal.
No.
But
the way it works, right?
That's the way it works. The covenant is more important than people. Uh-oh. Now we're getting into something. The covenant is more important than what people determine should be important. God has a plan, and we need to be a part of what God is doing, not a part of what we want to do. Now, with that being said, how can we, as a matter of fact, it's interesting because in Parashat Toldot, Rabbi Jacobson answers this huge question, and he did it in a seminary called Or Chaim in Muncie, New York, back in 2016. And he asked this question: how can we call Esau Rasha if his fate was predetermined in the womb of his mother? Do you hear me? Rasha means wicked. How can we call him wicked if that's what he was supposed to do?
So does that mean he was only born with an evil inclination?
Not quite.
No, he's a person, right?
He's a person. Right. So how do we balance those who don't actually live up to the expectation of guardianship of the covenant versus those who do? What was Yaakov's disposition toward his brother?
He loved him.
He loved his brother.
It says it right here. He loved him.
He loved his brother. Not only that, he tried to restore his relationship with him. As scared as he was that his brother was going to kill him, he attempted to restore his relationship. So what do we say about the whole idea of this thing? I think it's found in the haftorah portion. The haftorah in Malachi 1:1 through 2:7 ends with a strong admonition to the kohanim, the priest, to return to the original covenant that God had made to their ancestors. Aaron, the high priest, true teaching was in his mouth, it says, and injustice was found on and injustice not found on his lip. In peace and iniquity he went with me, and he brought back many from iniquity. So what was the complaint? The prophet Malachi then rebuked the kohanim, the priest at the time, who offered blemishes and emaciated animals on God's offering. He brought sacrifices that were blind and lame. He says, quote, were you to offer it to your governor? Would you be pleased, or would he be favored in you? So would you offer this to the president, to your mayor, to your governor? Would he be pleased at something like this? He says this. He says, oh, that there was even one among you that would close the doors of the temple, and that you would not kindle the fire on my altar in vain. Now hold on a second. That's huge. You mean to tell me that the creator of the universe is saying, I would rather you shut the doors and not do a sacrifice as to bring me something broken, something that is not pure? So, wow, now we see what God is saying. What God is saying, we need protectors of the covenant that are willing to keep the covenant if nobody else will do it. And I would rather you keep the covenant. It would be better to shut the doors of the temple than to keep destroying the covenant. It is important that we fulfill the covenant. So how do we do that? First, we know that Abraham was given the covenant from God, the covenant of land, the covenant of progeny, and later we know the people were given the Torah. It was the keeper of the Torah. The people of Israel were called to be the priest for the nations. They were there to preserve the Torah and to keep it. So for 3,800 years, They have preserved the Torah. Today we stand and sit here and study the words of the great sages of Judaism in the Tanakh. It's amazing to me that we're able to do that because they have done exactly what God said they would do. Now, there are those who have attempted within Judaism to destroy it, to water it down, to negate it to some secular idea, but there has been those who have meticulously preserved the Torah. Has their preservation of the Torah been absolutely perfect? No, because it wasn't intended to ever be perfect. It was intended to have somebody who took the stand to preserve the Torah. I must ask now, how do the nations preserve the Torah? How are we covenant partners in the Torah? Now we know the covenant wasn't made to the nations, but it was made with whom? Abraham and his people. However, the people of the nations that leave their avodah zarah, their idol worship, and they embrace the Torah, and they accept upon them the Sheva mitzvot, the mitzvahs that God gave them from the beginning, and begin to study the Torah, we then at some level begin to preserve the Torah ourselves. We become, guardians of the Torah. How do we guard the Torah? Do what? Supporting Israel, supporting the Torah, supporting the rabbis who teach the Torah, supporting the sages of Judaism. To me, it's the greatest chutzpah in the world when I hear someone come from the non-Jewish world who comes out of their religious views, and they say, well, I'm not going to listen to any of the sages of Judaism or the rabbis. I'm only going to study the Tanakh. Now, it sounds noble, but that's not preserving the covenant. Why? Because the covenant was given to the people. It was not given in a vacuum for somebody else to take and attempt to extract some religious ideas out. As a matter of fact, it's against Torah law for the Gentile nations to take the Tanakh and make a religion out of it. Did you know that? If that's the case, then how do we become guardians of the Torah? That means that we don't talk from our own mouth. We stand on the shoulders of the sages. We don't teach things that come from my own digestive system. It comes from the actual text of the rabbis and the sages. So,
Teachings in other religions, though, that teach us to follow the rabbis.
do what now?
Even in other religion, there are teachings that teach us to listen to the rabbis.
Yeah.
And not just to, there are teachings in other religions.
Okay.
That say that you need to listen to the rabbis.
Oh, no, there is. Are you talking about that one specific place? Yes. No, absolutely. But they don't listen to that anyway.
No, but I'm just saying.
Yeah.
What I'm saying
Right.
is, though, even in other religions, it tells you to listen
Right.
to them.
So the whole point is, how do we become guardians of the covenant? By living to the highest expectations, knowing that we are not the guardians. We're not obligated to live according to the covenant that the Jews were given. However, we can most definitely declare with clarity of mind what the covenant is and what the laws are and who is obligated and who is not. And at the same time, when someone comes, we need to become sort of that defensive barrier for the Jewish world, for people that want to tear apart the Jewish thought and the Jewish process. We can come educated and learned, and we would know how to respond. So therefore, with that being said, may you all become guardians of the Torah. May we fulfill the example of Yaakov and the great patriarchs of faith as they maintain, even in the midst of their weaknesses and difficulties, a strong proclivity to preserve the Torah and their relationship with God. Amen. That concludes this shiur. Now we go into the